Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. A rainy morning in Brooklyn, the kind of lazy drizzle that looked like someone sprinkling sugar over the streets. Raindrops slid down the cafe windows, reflecting the glowing Hazel and Bean Cafe sign in golden light. Inside, the rich aroma of roasted coffee filled the cozy space, blending with the warm scent of cinnamon and vanilla from freshly baked muffins. Behind the counter, Isabella Marino, 25, was wrestling with an old espresso machine that seemed to have a soul of its own. Her hair was tied in a high ponytail, a few strands falling around her cheeks. Her big brown eyes looked tired but mischievous. The cream-colored apron she wore had a few cocoa stains, and her lipstick had faded to a dull shade halfway. She worked here 7 days a week, mornings at this cafe, evenings at an Italian restaurant, and sometimes picking up freelance translation gigs just to keep her dream of translating Italian literature alive. But that rainy morning, even with the exhaustion, she still smiled. The kind of smile that made customers come back, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. The doorbell jingled. A man walked in, and the entire cafe seemed to pause. He was tall, over 6 feet, wearing a silver-gray coat dusted with rain, and black leather shoes polished enough to belong in a GQ ad. His dark hair was neatly styled, a few strands falling purposefully over his forehead. His face was calm, chiseled, and his storm-gray eyes held the quiet authority of someone used to giving orders. Isabella didn't know his name, but she knew the type. Cold, busy, the kind who believed a perfect espresso was one served exactly when they walked in. He stopped at the counter. His voice was low, clear, steady, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Espresso, no sugar, and no mistakes. No, please, no smile, no glance. She looked up, pen in hand, lips curving slightly. Got it, Your Majesty of Caffeine. His brow furrowed. Slowly he raised his head. His eyes scanned her. Not flirtatiously, but like he was scanning a barcode of emotions. She pretended to look down, muttering under her breath in the Sicilian, just loud enough for herself. Testa di ferro arrogante. Arrogant ironhead. But he heard it, clearly. He set his phone down, his voice dropping low enough to hush the entire cafe. Say that again, but while looking at me. The air thickened. A customer froze mid-stir. The other barista stopped breathing. Isabella looked up. She had no idea where the courage came from, only that if she stayed silent, he'd win. She smiled, tilting her head slightly. Fine. Testa di ferro arrogante. The corner of his mouth lifted, a slow, dangerous half-smile. She thought, Great, Isabella. You just insulted the man who could probably buy this entire cafe. But strangely, instead of anger, he just looked at her a second longer than normal, as if trying to memorize her face. Then he nodded slightly, picked up the espresso she just placed down, took a sip, and without breaking eye contact said, Perfect. His voice was deep and warm enough to send a small shiver down her spine. The espresso and your pronunciation. Then he walked out, leaving behind a faint trail of sandalwood, a scent that felt like an unspoken promise. Isabella sank onto the stool behind the counter, her heart still racing. She forced a laugh and turned to her coworker. He's probably some CEO or something. That's good of a coffee, and his face still looks like granite. Her friend giggled. He's handsome, though. Handsome? Yeah, the dangerous kind. The kind that gets people fired. They both burst out laughing, their voices blending with the aroma of coffee, making the Brooklyn morning feel a little brighter. Outside, the rain continued to fall, blurring the fogged-up windows. Isabella didn't know that the man in the gray coat had just stepped into a sleek car, opened his laptop and typed, Hazel and Bean Cafe, Brooklyn, Isabella Marino. She didn't know that Your Majesty of Caffeine had just become the first phrase to make Matteo Romano, a millionaire long thought incapable of emotion, smile for the first time in 2 years. And her? She just shrugged, wiped down the counter and thought, Men in suits aren't my business. I just need coffee, rent money, and a bit of peace. But that morning, with one sugarless espresso and one Sicilian insult, had unknowingly melted a crack into a heart of steel. One cup of coffee, one look, and a beginning neither of them realized had just started. They had stepped into the first chapter of their own story. Morning in Midtown Manhattan gleamed with that signature steel light, reflected off the glass towers of Romano Industries, where power was measured in revenue and silence. On the 58th floor, the office of Matteo Romano, chairman, tech, and real estate investor, the young millionaire Forbes once dubbed Ironhead, stood tall in a world of glass and silver. The room exuded a precision bordering on emotionless. A walnut desk perfectly aligned with the floor, a Swiss clock that hadn't lost a second, not a single paper out of line. At the center, Matteo, white shirt, dark gray tie, neatly slicked hair, sat motionless, like a statue programmed to control the world with nothing but a glance. He disliked disorder, he disliked noise, and he especially disliked emotion. To Matteo, everything had a formula. Logic plus discipline equals survival. 9 a.m. strategy meeting. Two senior executives sat trembling before the glass desk, presenting the new marketing plan. Matteo said nothing, merely tapped his finger against the table. Steady, rhythmic, like a countdown. "Mr. Romano," the first one began, voice hoarse, "if we raise the ad budget by 15%, we could potentially—" "No need." Matteo cut him off. Low, calm, and dangerously cold. "You're both dismissed. Efficiency dropped 9% last quarter. I don't repeat other people's mistakes." Silence fell, thick as glass. Matteo rose and walked to the window, gazing down at Fifth Avenue, the cars below flowing like steel veins through the city. "Sir," his assistant ventured carefully, "are you really not taking any day off? Your schedule is full for the next 3 months." He turned, eyes sharp, expression unmoved. "Rest is what weak people do when they run out of reasons to live." That sentence had become legend at Romano Industries, the kind that made employees fear and admire him in equal measure. Matteo never raised his voice. Anger was an emotion, and he believed emotions were weaknesses. But that night, as rain stitched fine lines across the city, Matteo still sat in his office. The desk lamp cast a soft golden light across a face almost too perfect and almost too empty. Charts blinked on his computer screen, but his mind wasn't there. It drifted back to a rainy morning in Brooklyn, inside a tiny cafe, where a girl with her hair tied up, brown eyes and fearless lips had once called him "Your Majesty of Caffeine." She'd muttered something in Sicilian. He hadn't just heard it, he'd felt it. The way she looked straight at him, unflinching, unapologetic, was something rare in his world of nodding heads and polite fear. Matteo leaned back and for the first time in a year smiled. A real smile. "Testa di ferro arroganti," he murmured in smooth Italian. "Arrogant iron head." He pulled up the security monitor, scrolled through his financial tabs, then hesitated. Almost unconsciously, he typed into the search bar, "Hazel and Bean Cafe, Brooklyn." Results appeared, a small coffee shop, 4.5 stars on Yelp. Top review, "The barista here always smiles, even when you look like you're about to fall apart." Matteo leaned back, arms crossed. That girl smiled, in a world where he only knew silence. His assistant Lara knocked and entered with a folder. "Mr. Romano, this is the investment contract from the Milan Fund. Needs your signature before Thursday." "Leave it on the desk." "And I added the doctor's appointment that your mother requested. Are you still declining it?" "I'm not sick." "Not even emotionally?" she asked softly. He looked at her, sharp enough to make her stop breathing for a moment. But instead of scolding, he replied evenly, "I don't waste time fixing what isn't broken." When the door closed, he exhaled. For the first time in years, Matteo felt a small crack in his steel shell. Not from pressure or profit, but from an ordinary woman with a coffee-stained apron and a Sicilian accent. Near midnight, Manhattan shimmered like an artificial Milky Way. He stood by the window, watching headlights ripple across the wet street. Suddenly, he remembered those small hands holding a cappuccino tray, that stubborn voice, and that tired but genuine smile. Matteo unlocked his phone, staring at the number he'd saved earlier. Not because he needed coffee, but because he wanted to hear her voice again. But he stopped, smirked faintly, shaking his head. How ridiculous, Romano. You're thinking about a girl who doesn't even know who you are. And though reason dismissed it, his heart, for the first time in years, truly beat. Not for a contract, not for a conquest, but for a Sicilian curse whispered on a rainy Brooklyn morning. A few small words that made the man who forgot how to smile feel alive again. 3 days after that rainy morning, Brooklyn was glowing under the sun again. On the street, maple leaves twirled gently in the breeze, while inside Hazel and Bean Cafe, Isabella was once more at war with the old espresso machine that refused to die. Her hair was tied up, a tiny silver earring glinted beneath a few stray strands, and she wore her usual smile, the kind that said, "I'm exhausted, but I'm still alive." Her life was simple enough to be measured in the number of cups of coffee she sold each day. What she didn't know was that 10 miles away in the glass-walled office on the 58th floor of Romano Industries, Matteo Romano was reading a file about her. On his laptop screen was a slim 3-page document. Isabella Marino, age 25, born in Boston, Italian immigrant parents, bachelor's in linguistics, Columbia University, works as a barista at Hazel and Bean Cafe and part-time server at Trattoria Luna. Runs a bilingual poetry translation blog called Bridges and Words. Small readership, but praised by several professors for her ability to preserve the soul of the original language. Matteo leaned back in his chair, his gaze darkening slightly. He remembered her, the sharp wit behind tired eyes, the way she muttered in Sicilian without a hint of fear. It hadn't been insolence. It was the pride of someone who knew her worth even when the world didn't see it. He gave a faint, amused smile. A girl who can translate poetry and insult a CEO in the same breath. Fascinating. That afternoon, he appeared at the cafe. No 3-piece suit this time, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, top buttons undone. Yet his presence still turned heads. He chose the VIP table by the window, where sunlight gleamed through the espresso cup and reflected off the black watch on his wrist. Maria, Isabella's co-worker, nudged her with a grin. "Isabella, your Iron Man who doesn't smile is back. Asked for you." "Asked for me? Why?" "No idea, but he ordered one espresso and you." Isabella sighed, tugging down her apron and steadying her voice. "If I get fired because of him, you're taking the blame." She walked out with a half-polite, half-teasing smile. "What will it be this time? Your Majesty of caffeine?" Matteo looked up. For a brief second, the entire world behind her seemed to fade. "I didn't come here for coffee." "Then what, to reclaim the dignity I supposedly stole last time?" He chuckled, and the sound made the air around them a little brighter. "I came to offer you a job." She crossed her arms, tilting her head. "If it involves selling my soul, I'll need to see the fine print." "No souls required. I need an Italian-English translator for a new cultural project. I heard you're fluent in both." "I'm fluent in 2 things, coffee and receipts. I'll pay you enough that you won't have to make either again." She laughed, part sarcasm, part curiosity. "What are you, some mafia boss disguised as an investor?" "If I were mafia," he said, voice low and warm, "do you think you'd still be sitting here?" His answer caught her off guard. Equal parts funny and dangerously magnetic. 2 days later, curiosity won over caution. Isabella went to his office. When the glass doors slid open, she had to catch her breath. The space wasn't as cold as she'd imagined. It was bright, open, alive. A blend of Italian classicism and New York modernism. Walnut floors, abstract paintings beside Venetian landscapes, a desk lined with bilingual books and architectural models. She murmured under her breath, "Is this an office or an art gallery?" "Both," he replied, pouring espresso from a vintage copper machine. "I like to think everything, even business, starts with art." He handed her a cup, his gaze softening. "I'm opening a center for contemporary Italian art in Manhattan. I need someone who understands language, culture, and isn't afraid to argue with me when I'm wrong." She took a sip, heart beating faster than caffeine should allow. "Do you really need a translator? Or just someone to win arguments with you?" Both. In that moment, the afternoon light caught her hair, and something in Mateo's expression shifted, as if he were seeing a forgotten part of himself reflected in her. Passion. When she left, the sky outside was a pale, quiet blue. Isabella stepped out of Romano Tower with the contract in hand, smiling faintly. The offer smelled a little dangerous, but also like hope. From the tall window above, Mateo watched her cross the street, sunlight flickering in her hair. He thought for perhaps the first time in his life, this translation project might change more than just my company. It might just rewrite my heart. On her first day at the Romano Foundation, Isabella felt like she had just signed a contract with Mars. She walked into the building wearing a borrowed pastel suit, hair neatly tied, clutching a stack of papers twice as thick as the translation she was supposed to submit. The marble floor mirrored her faint reflection beneath the morning light. Everyone who passed looked as if they'd stepped straight out of Architectural Digest, polished, cold, efficient. And her? She was just the coffee girl on a 6-month contract, working for a terrifying boss. Mateo Romano arrived at exactly 8 a.m., not a minute early. Dark gray suit, black tie, a face as serious as Newton's laws. You're on time. Good. I hate lateness. Yes. I also hate people who make others guess whether they're angry or not. I'm not angry. I'm testing your patience. Well, you're doing an excellent job. He froze for half a second. No one had ever dared talk to him like that, and still managed to smile. Isabella's desk was set directly across from his, separated only by a glass panel. Her first task, translate a 200-page presentation from Italian. Mateo's tone was calm but sharp enough to slice glass. I need a perfect translation in 3 hours. 3 hours? Would you prefer 4? No, I'd prefer 3 days. I'm not a robot. Pity. I hire for accuracy, not cuteness. She bit her lip, nearly tempted to throw her pen at his head. 3 hours later, she handed him the first draft, fingers trembling from sprint-level typing. He read a line and frowned. This sentence, Rome is ancient. Yes, because Rome is ancient. No, change it to Rome is alive. Sorry, I don't invent, I translate. Language without emotion is just a corpse. Maybe you should have stayed in coffee service. She looked up, eyes flashing. If you want poetry, hire Shakespeare. I'm here to translate, not write love sonnets. I don't need poetry. I need soul. The air between them thickened. An employee passing by practically slid out of sight, as if escaping a bomb zone. At lunch, Isabella texted her best friend from the cafeteria. First day, my boss is definitely an alien. If I go missing, check the 58th floor of the Romano Foundation. Her friend replied, Stop whining. If he's hot, at least hell has scenery. She snorted just as Mateo walked by. What's funny? Oh, nothing. Just laughing to be less scared of you. Good. Laughter is good for the heart. I don't like stressed employees. He meant it sincerely, but his voice was so cold it sounded like sarcasm. That afternoon, Isabella accidentally dropped a pile of documents. Mateo crouched to help, and instead of scolding her, he paused, eyes catching the shy curve of her smile. Next time, don't torture yourself by juggling both coffee and translations. I know, but if I don't, I'll starve. You could feed on passion. People say it's possible. And you, living on caffeine and power? Yes. Those two never betray anyone. She burst out laughing. Clearly, you've never met burnt coffee. By 9 p.m., everyone else had gone home, but Isabella stayed, finishing her translation. Mateo remained in his office, desk lamp casting a soft gold halo over his shoulders. Through the glass, he saw her leaning close to the screen, headphones on, her lips moving in rhythm. Her quiet voice floated through the stillness, an old Italian melody, gentle and heartfelt. She didn't know he was standing by the doorway, listening. In a world filled with photocopiers and boardroom tension, that voice felt like something fragile, soft, real, human. When she finally turned around, she jumped. You scared me. My apologies. I didn't know you sang while working. I don't sing. I breathe through music. He paused, then nodded. Good. Keep breathing. This place needs more sounds like that. For the first time, his eyes weren't cold. There was something unmistakably human in them. A few minutes later, at the pantry, she stopped short, seeing Matteo brewing espresso himself. Slowly, precisely, almost like a ritual. He stirred small circles, inhaled the aroma, then took a quiet sip. No secretary, no automatic machine, just him and a bronze coffee maker. "You drink coffee at 10 p.m.?" she asked. "I don't drink to stay awake. I drink to remember." "Remember what?" "That something real still exists, whether or not I can control it." She didn't know what to say, just smiled softly and walked past. "I get that. For me, that's music. For me, maybe it's the person who sings in the office." She blinked. "Did you just compliment me?" "Maybe. Don't get used to it." That night back home, Isabella collapsed on her bed and burst out laughing. Day one, I wanted to quit 10 times, but maybe he's not completely made of ice. Meanwhile, in his high-rise apartment, Matteo sat by the window, watching the Manhattan skyline flicker. He found himself wondering, what is that girl doing now? The one who somehow made this office feel warmer. Neither of them knew that from that moment on, something had begun to shift. Not just in the contract, but in the hearts of two people who thought they had nothing in common, except coffee, arguments, and a few small songs that lingered in the New York night. That night, New York rained, as if the sky itself were trying to wash away a long, tired day. Wind swept across the glass walls of the 58th floor at Romano Foundation, making the raindrops slide down like melting glass. The city glimmered in gold lights below, while inside the office, two people were still working late. Isabella was fighting through a manuscript as thick as a mini dictionary, while Matteo was reading financial reports with the same grim expression one might wear watching the apocalypse. Then, boom, a thunderclap, and the lights went out. The entire floor went dark. 1 second of absolute silence. Then Isabella's small voice. Matteo? Did the darkness just swallow me whole?" His voice came from somewhere in the dark. Calm, annoyingly calm. "No, but if you scream again, I'll assume there's a break-in. Sorry, but unlike the company's Iron Man, I don't have night vision. Iron Man doesn't have emotions. I, however, have eyes, which are completely useless in this pitch-black room." She heard him chuckle, a low, quiet sound that almost blended into the rain. Isabella fumbled through a cabinet, looking for the emergency flashlight. Of course, it was dead. Perfect. Dead flashlight, dead laptop. We've officially gone back to the Stone Age. "If we had," Matteo said from the dark, "you'd probably be the one to invent coffee. At least I know how to make it. Unlike someone who calls it financial motivation." She flicked on her tiny gas lighter, creating a small golden flame, the only light in the vast room. For a second, his face appeared, half in shadow, half in glow. His hair was slightly tousled, sleeves rolled up, his white shirt open at the collar. He didn't look like the cold CEO from glossy magazines anymore, but like a man mildly disarmed by a power outage. "I'll make coffee," she said, serious as if signing a peace treaty. "With that backup gas stove?" "Exactly. A Brooklyn miracle." As she stirred the water, she chattered on. "You know, in Sicily, they say anyone who can't make coffee doesn't know how to love." "So you're bragging about your love skills now?" "No, just saying I make great coffee." He laughed, a really laugh this time, a deep, warm sound that made her glance back, startled enough to almost spill the pot. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. You just made me laugh. That's rare." "Oh, great. I'll add that to my resume." Successfully made Matteo Romano laugh, with caffeine and sarcasm. She handed him a mug. Steam curled in the space between them. In that faint, flickering light, their eyes met. Just for a heartbeat, but enough to melt a little of the ice in the room. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, rain drumming softly outside like background music. Isabella told him about her childhood in Sicily, the sun-soaked afternoons, narrow stone streets, and her grandmother, who always said, "The best coffee is brewed with kindness and a hint of rebellion." Matteo listened quietly, elbows resting on his knees, his face gentler than she'd ever seen. "You're not afraid of me?" he asked, his voice strangely soft. "Of course I am," she teased, shrugging. "But my family has a saying, the colder something is, the easier it breaks. You should be careful." He laughed again, a genuine, unguarded laugh. And as if the universe were timing it perfectly, the lights flickered back on. Bright white light filled the room, bouncing off the coffee mugs, her skin, and his smile. Isabella squinted, muttering, "Well, there goes the cozy vibe. Bright light kills the mood." Matteo kept looking at her, still smiling. "No, I think it just made something clearer." "What's that?" "That this room was never truly warm until you walked in." She blushed, pretending to clear her throat. "All right, Mr. Romano. No poetry. You don't want me adding a late-night flirting clause to your contract. If that clause includes coffee, I'll sign it." When she packed up to leave, Matteo stayed behind, fingers resting lightly on the warm rim of his coffee cup. He didn't say a word, just shook his head with a quiet smile still lingering on his lips. And Isabella, walking down the hallway, couldn't help laughing softly to herself. Well, maybe even a man made of steel can melt a little. Outside, the rain continued to fall, reflecting 1,000 golden lights. One blackout. Two people who thought they had nothing in common, an iron CEO and a talkative Sicilian girl, found something simple instead. Sometimes all it takes is one cup of coffee, a small flame, and a real smile to warm an entire room. That night, New York gleamed like a postcard, cold, elegant, and glittering. The first snow of the season fell quietly, city lights reflecting off each flake as if the sky had spilled silver dust. Isabella stood before the mirror and took a deep breath. The red satin dress fit perfectly, its square neckline catching the soft glow of her lamp like fire. She grabbed her clutch and whispered to herself, "This is just a work event, not a date." Not a date. Then she sighed. Though honestly, dating might be less stressful than this. Matteo was already in the hotel lobby where the dinner was held. Black suit, silver tie, and an expression so cold even the heater seemed to give up. He was mid-conversation with a Japanese investor when the elevator doors slid open. And then he saw her. For 2 seconds, the world simply stopped. The clinking glasses, the low jazz music, the polite chatter, all dissolved into silence. She stepped out with quiet confidence, unpretentious yet radiant. Her hair fell softly against her shoulders, her skin glowed under the golden light, and her lips held the shade of Italian wine. And in that impossibly brief, impossibly human moment, Matteo Romano, the man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, just stood there, as if his brain needed a full reboot. She stopped in front of him, eyebrow arched. "You said this was a work event." "It is." His voice was lower than usual, almost rough. "But I should have warned you. You're about to make the whole room forget why they came here." "What's that supposed to mean?" "That red has never been properly defined until you wore it." She froze. The words hit straight to her chest. Part compliment, part confession, and entirely Matteo. Calm, measured, and disarmingly sincere. "Did you just compliment me?" she asked, half wary, half flustered. "No, I made an observation." He gave the faintest shrug. "But if you'd like to take it as a compliment, I won't argue." Her cheeks turned pink, and she scrambled to regain control. "Careful. People say sweet talk always comes with consequences. I'll take the risk. If the consequence is you arguing with me again." The dinner began. Investors, artists, and Italian-French cultural delegates sat around the long crystal-lit table, the scene straight out of a film. Isabella sat beside Matteo, doing her best to concentrate on the translation. But it was hard. Every time he leaned close to speak, that low velvet voice of his made her forget half the words. She whispered to herself, "Focus, Isabella. He's your boss, a robot, the coldest man in Manhattan." But that robot just pulled out her chair and murmured, "Careful, your dress might catch the heel. I don't want anyone stepping on it." "How considerate of you." No, I just don't want anyone ruining what I'm enjoying looking at. She opened her mouth to retort, but her blush got there first. Everything went smoothly until a tipsy French partner, Monsieur Laurent, laughed and said, Romano, my friend, sometimes I think you're an elegant robot, making money without ever tiring. The air froze. Matteo's brow arched slightly, his gaze sharp as a blade. Before the tension could thicken, Isabella smiled lightly and replied in fluent, silky French, Excusez-moi, monsieur, but robots can't create art. They only know how to copy it. The whole table burst out laughing. Laurent raised his glass. Touché! This young lady is sharper than Romano himself. Matteo glanced at her. Surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by something rarer. Admiration? I thought you were just my translator, he murmured. Didn't expect you to be my diplomatic rescue. I charge by the hour, you know. Crisis management isn't in the contract. I'll pay extra. For my multilingual sarcasm? For the ability to make an entire room side with me without me saying a word. She covered her mouth to hide a laugh, her cheeks glowing pink. He noticed, and for once, didn't look away. When the dinner ended, the snow had thickened outside. Matteo offered to drive her home. They walked out of the hotel in silence. The air was sharp and cold, but their breath mingled in the amber streetlight, a quiet warmth against the frost. I'm not good at saying thank you, he said finally, hands tucked in his coat pockets. That's all right. I can read between the lines. And what do you read? A little gratitude, a little surprise, and a little panic because you actually complimented me. He looked over, the corner of his mouth lifting. You always have to get the last word, don't you? Usually because I'm right. Not this time. He stopped, tilting his head slightly, eyes softening. This time, you're too beautiful. I lose. She laughed, pretending to sound smug. Fine. You win on flattery, lose on logic. But when snow landed on her hair, Matteo only smiled. The kind of smile that could melt winter itself. And Isabella realized for the first time, she didn't want to win this argument. Later that night, back home, she lay on her bed giggling to herself. Day one of disaster dinner. I wanted to quit 10 times, but apparently Iron Man has a heartbeat, and in his penthouse, Matteo sat by the window, watching the snowfall blur the skyline. Under his breath, he whispered, If this is a disaster, may it happen again. That night, the Romano Foundation building was almost silent. Only the desk lamp on Matteo's table remained lit, casting sharp lines of light across his face, equal parts focus and fatigue. Isabella sat across from him, surrounded by a mountain of documents and 2 cups of cold coffee. Outside, snow fell steadily, white, quiet, like a slow classical symphony. She was halfway through translating a passage when soft violin notes floated from the corner speaker. Gentle, aching, breath-like. Tchaikovsky? She asked, surprised. Concerto in D major, he replied without looking up. My mother's favorite. Isabella lifted her gaze, studying him a little longer. Was she a musician? A violinist, he said, voice low and measured. A well-known one. She taught in Milan, moved to New York for my father. I used to play piano. She died when I was 12. A delicate silence settled between them. The violin kept playing, telling the rest of a story he didn't finish. And after that, you stopped playing? She asked softly. He nodded. I was afraid. Music made me feel. Feelings made me lose focus. And losing focus cost me everything else. So you chose control over emotion. I chose survival. That answer made her pause. In that moment, Matteo wasn't the flawless CEO everyone feared. He was just a man who'd lost his mother and locked his heart so tightly it forgot how to feel safe. You really are testa de ferro, she murmured, managing a small smile. Ironhead. He glanced up, one eyebrow slightly raised. Again. But your heart, she said softly, is made of music. He exhaled through a faint smile, shaking his head. My heart doesn't have time to play music, Isabella. Too busy doing what? She teased lightly. This time he looked straight at her, his gaze heavy, tired, but profoundly human. Too busy for the past, for feelings, for anything that makes me lose control. His tone deepened. Do you have any idea how many people I'm responsible for? How many families depend on this company? How many homes have food and shelter because I keep those numbers balanced every day? He gripped his pen tighter, his voice roughening. Emotions don't do that. They don't pay salaries. They don't keep jobs. They just make me make mistakes. They make me weak. Isabella said nothing. She watched him, not with judgment now, but with quiet understanding. Behind the expensive suit and the cool smile, she saw it. A man who had chosen duty over peace, stability over softness. Her voice, when it came, was calm but certain. You know, people only say things like that when they've loved deeply once and lost painfully. He blinked, startled. I haven't. You don't have to say it, she cut in gently. I can see it. In the way you listen to music, the words you choose, the way you look away every time something feels too real. Mateo chuckled quietly, not sarcastically, but like someone who'd just been seen for the first time in years and didn't know how to react. You always need to have the last word, don't you? Usually, she said, but not this time. No? Why not? Because right now, I just feel sorry for you. The room went still. Only the violin played on. Soft, slow, like breath on glass. Mateo's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't have time, Isabella. She smiled, eyes bright, a little sad. Then why does my heart race every time you say that? He said nothing. Their eyes met. Two shades that shouldn't blend. Steel and fire, logic and emotion, frost and warmth. Then he turned away, his voice lower, truer than she'd ever heard it. Careful, Isabella. Feelings are the one thing I always lose to. She grinned faintly, her tone soft but sure. Good. Then let me win this time. That night when she left the office, snow blanketed the streets. She turned back once, looking up at the Romano Tower, the 58th floor still glowing like a lonely star against the winter sky. Inside, Mateo stood by the window, watching her disappear into the snow. He thought, maybe emotions don't make us weak. Maybe they just remind us we're alive. And Isabella, walking through the quiet storm, smiled to herself. So the man behind that perfect suit loves deeper than he'll ever admit. The launch night of the Italian Modern Arts Center was one of the most elegant events in Manhattan that season. Crystal lights shimmered across glass walls, wine glowed amber under chandeliers, and classical music mingled with the heartbeats of people who all had something to hide. When Isabella entered, the room seemed to forget how to breathe. Her black satin dress hugged her perfectly, backless, the soft fabric flowing like smoke. Her hair was pinned up, a few strands brushing her shoulders, delicate and poised in that effortless way that needed no embellishment. She wasn't looking for him, yet she felt his gaze instantly, steady, sharp, and warm enough to raise her body temperature despite the 68-degree air conditioning. Mateo stood just a few meters away, in a black suit and silver gray tie, light tracing the edge of his jawline. When she approached, he said softly, so softly that everything else in the room faded into static. I used to think red was my weakness, but it turns out it's black. She bit her lip, steadying herself. You should learn to control your color palette, Mr. Romano. He tilted his head, that calm, precise smile playing at the corner of his mouth. I control everything except you. The night went perfectly. The project was praised by the press as a bridge between two cultures. Isabella stood beside him, translating every word of the interviews. But every time his voice, deep, smooth, deliberate, filled the air, her heartbeat stumbled, as if it remembered a song he once refused to play. By the time the last guest left, the clock had nearly reached midnight. The grand hall was almost empty now. Just them, a few staff cleaning up, and Manhattan glittering far below through the glass. Are you tired? She asked. No, but I doubt I'll sleep. Coffee? No, you, she laughed, thinking he was joking. But when their eyes met, the laughter stopped. He led her up to the rooftop. The New York night stretched before them, a sea of man-made stars, the sound of traffic, the hum of wind, the pulse of the city below, all blurred into one distant symphony. Isabella crossed her arms, looking up. I never thought I'd stand here with someone like you. What kind of someone am I? Cold, calculated, and dangerous, at least to other people's hearts. He stepped closer, just one breath away. For 3 weeks, he said quietly, I haven't been able to focus on anything but you. His voice was low, unguarded, the kind that made her pulse trip. She tried to sound calm. Trust me, emotions weren't in the contract. He smirked faintly. Then let's add an amendment. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't impulsive. Mateo's kiss was the kind that came after too many nights of restraint, slow, deliberate, but carrying a storm beneath. She kissed him back, almost involuntarily. Their breaths tangled, the world dissolving into a blur of light and warmth. Wind swept across the rooftop. The music below had faded. All that remained was the sound of two hearts forgetting every boundary they'd built. Work, logic, self-control, all melted like snow under fire. In that moment, Isabella felt herself falling, not from the building, but from the fragile safety of control she'd lived behind. He touched her cheek, voice rough, raw, and almost breaking. You know, it took me 12 years to avoid emotion, and 3 weeks to lose to you. You should sue me for breaching the contract. I'm thinking of drafting a new one. She laughed, breathless against his lips. An amendment allowing emotions? No. An amendment called no turning back. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the office, and though no one said a word, the world had changed. Isabella arrived early. Everything seemed normal. The coffee machine humming, employees greeting one another, the secretary reading out the meeting schedule. Everything, except that Mateo wouldn't look at her. When they passed in the hallway, his gaze caught hers, just for a second, before slipping away. She forced a polite smile, but her heart was pounding again. This time, not from joy, but from fear. So we're pretending nothing happened? She whispered. He paused, his voice quiet, strained. Not pretending. Maintaining distance. If I let emotion take over, everything will collapse. She looked at him, eyes full of something between pain and understanding. You're afraid? I'm afraid of hurting you, and of myself even more. The elevator doors closed between them. In the glass reflection stood two people, still close, yet already belonging to different worlds. One who lived by feeling and one who only knew how to survive by logic. Outside, snow began to fall again, and on the rooftop from the night before, a forgotten wine glass still rested on the railing, catching the morning light, the only trace left of a kiss that destroyed everything. That day, the air inside Romano Foundation felt thick, like a storm about to break. The news spread fast. Salvatore Romano, founder, legend, and the man whose name once made Wall Street tremble, was coming to the office in person. When Isabella heard that name, something twisted in her stomach. Mateo had never spoken much about his father, only once saying, "We have different definitions of principle," but when the elevator doors slid open and that man stepped out, she understood everything. Salvatore Romano was over 70, yet still tall, broad-shouldered, his gaze as sharp as a blade. Silver hair slicked back, a black Italian suit that gleamed under the lights, a lion-headed cane of polished silver. Every detail radiated the kind of authority that made the entire floor fall silent. Two assistants followed him, half a step behind, expressionless, wordless. Mateo came out to meet him, face calm but eyes wary. "Father, son!" Salvatore's voice was deep, rough, still heavy with his Italian accent. "It's been a long time. Seems you've changed your style of play." His gaze swept across the room and stopped at Isabella, who stood beside the architectural model of the art project. "And this," he said slowly, "is the reason for that change, isn't it?" The air froze. Isabella lowered her head slightly, steadying her voice. "I'm the translation coordinator for the project, Mr. Romano." "Translator, hmm?" His lips curved into a cold smirk. "I've met many translators in my life, but rarely one who makes my son look like he'd trade an empire just to hear her speak." Mateo moved subtly in front of her, voice clipped and cold. "She has nothing to do with what's between us." Wrong, Salvatore said, tapping his cane against the marble floor. Anyone a Romano lets in becomes the family's business. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing, voice like iron. Do you know what Romano Industries was built on, Signorina? On hard work and trust, she answered softly. No, he said, tone like a verdict. On discipline. On blood. And on one rule. A Romano does not love outsiders. The words landed like an ancient curse echoing through the modern room. Matteo's fist tightened at his side. That era is over. Which era? Salvatore snapped, a dry, bitter laugh escaping. The era when sons still respected their fathers? Or the one where men could keep their families from falling apart over a woman? His voice boomed like thunder. I already lost one empire to emotion, Matteo. I won't watch you do the same. Matteo drew in a deep breath, then straightened. You're talking about mother. Silence. For a fleeting second, something fragile, pain maybe, flickered behind the old man's eyes. Your mother was an artist, he said quietly, dreamy, soft. And in the end, it was her emotions that took her from us. You should have learned from that. Matteo's reply came firm, unwavering. I did learn. And that's exactly why I refuse to live half a life like you. Too afraid to love because you're too afraid to lose. The words shattered the air between them like glass breaking. Isabella stood frozen, afraid even to breathe. Salvatore stared at his son, fury and grief warring behind his eyes. I raised a Romano who knows control, who wins, who never bows. And now you stand here defying me. For a woman? No, father, Matteo said, his voice low, steady. For a woman who reminds me I'm human, not the shadow you left behind. Salvatore's hand tightened around his cane, his eyes blazing. Be careful, Matteo. The rule that keeps this family alive is simple. No one chooses the heart over the bloodline. Matteo stepped closer, the light catching on the sharp edges of his suit like blades. Then starting today, I'm no longer the old kind of Romano. No one spoke. The room fell utterly silent, only the wind howling faintly against the glass. Isabella felt her heart twist. In that instant, she understood. Matteo hadn't just turned his back on power. He'd walked away from the name that had defined his entire life. He turned to her, and for once his eyes weren't cold. They were warm, real, raw. Thank you for staying, he said softly. Even if it means standing in the storm. She shook her head, her voice trembling. I'm standing beside the man who's not afraid to love anymore. Salvatore looked at them both for a long, silent moment before turning away. At the door, without looking back, he said, Be careful, son. When you burn bridges, there's no way back. The door closed with a quiet, echoing click. After he left, Matteo sank into his chair, resting his forehead against his hand, eyes closed. Isabella stepped closer and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? He shook his head. No, but for the first time in my life, I feel free. She smiled, eyes bright under the lamplight. Freedom's scary, but it's the only thing that lets music play. He looked up at her, a weary smile tugging at his lips. I think my mother would have liked you. I think she just smiled, Isabella whispered. Outside, Manhattan still glittered in the night. But for them, the color of the city had changed. It was no longer the gold of power or pride. It was the quiet, steady glow of something new, the end of an era and the beginning of a love that finally felt real. The news hit like a storm, loud, merciless, and everywhere. By Monday morning, every major financial paper in New York ran the same headline. CEO Matteo Romano in alleged relationship with junior employee. The woman who shook the Roman Empire. Photos from the project launch, his gaze, her smile, the faint touch of a hand, were blown up and twisted into proof of a forbidden office romance. Shareholders were furious, reporters hunted, social media ignited. On the 58th floor, Matteo threw the newspaper onto his desk, his expression hardening into steel. Perfect, he muttered. 3 weeks. 3 weeks for everything to fall apart. The door burst open. Salvatore Romano entered, flanked by 2 legal advisors. His voice was sharp, cold, metallic. I warned you. Feelings don't build empires. Matteo met his father's stare, his tone low but unflinching. This is a setup, a deliberate attack. An attack? Salvatore sneered. Yes, and they have every reason. He stepped closer, words cutting like glass. If you don't stop this, I'll handle the girl myself. No outsider destroys a Romano. Matteo rose abruptly, fists tightening. If you touch her, I'll never forgive you. You think I'm afraid? His father snapped, a cruel smile tugging his lips. Don't challenge the power that made you who you are, Matteo. The door slammed behind him. Only the sound of Matteo's ragged breathing remained, torn between two forces that could not coexist, duty and love. That afternoon, he called Isabella into his office. She entered cautiously. Before she could speak, his voice broke the silence. Low, strained. Isabella, you need to take a leave. She froze. You're saying I should quit? Just for now, he said, avoiding her eyes. The rumors are worse than I expected. The press, the shareholders, even my father. They'll use you to hurt me. If you step away, they'll have nothing to target. Her voice trembled, caught between disbelief and pain. So your way of protecting me is to erase me from your life? It's not like that, I dash. Don't. She cut him off, a brittle smile forming. I understand. I'm just a problem that needs solving. He stepped closer, trying to reach her hand, but she pulled away. Isabella, please, listen. You once told me that language carries emotion, she said, her eyes glistening. But when I needed to hear something real, you chose silence. And with that, she turned away. Tears slid down her cheek as the door closed softly behind her, a sound that sliced through him deeper than any word could. That night, Matteo sat alone in his office. Rain hammered the windows, the city lights blurring beyond. On his desk lay a folded note beside a cold cup of coffee. You taught me that words have feeling. So why were you silent when I needed you most? He read it again and again, chest tightening with every line. Her words cut, not out of anger, but out of truth. He whispered into the empty room, I wasn't silent because I felt nothing, Isabella. I was silent because if I spoke, my father would destroy you. 3 days later, the headlines shifted. Isabella Marino resigns from Romano Foundation. No statement, no farewell, not even a photograph. Matteo buried himself in work. Endless meetings, signatures, projects, strategy. Anything to stop the ache. Anything except breathing. But at night, when the Manhattan lights shimmered against the glass, he could almost hear her voice. You're a testa di ferro, an iron head. But your heart, it's all music. He used to believe discipline preserved everything. Now he knew it only preserved what had no soul. In her small Brooklyn apartment, Isabella sat by the window, watching rain trace the glass. She still kept the espresso cup he had made for her once. On the table, a headline glared up at her. Matteo Romano restructures company, halts Italian arts project. She sighed softly, whispering, You stopped the one thing that made you happy, just to protect me, didn't you? The question lingered in the quiet, like a song that never got to its final note. In his office, Matteo stood before the window, Manhattan sprawling beneath like a map of light. He held her note again, fingers trembling slightly. You were right, Isabella, he murmured. Language has emotion. And sometimes, silence is how the heart screams. He unlocked his phone, thumb hovering over her name. But he didn't call. Instead, he typed a message and saved it as a draft. I'm still fighting. For you. For us. Even if the world doesn't believe in us, please, believe in me. He set the phone down and gazed out at the skyline. Outside, the city buzzed on, but inside him, everything had shattered. That night, as snow returned to the city, Matteo opened the piano, the one that had been silent for 10 years. His fingers trembled on the keys. Then slowly the first note spilled out. Fragile, broken, but real. In the dim office light, he whispered, If it's war Father wants, fine. But I won't let anyone take away the last piece of music left in me. And somewhere across the city, Isabella lifted her head because she thought she heard something, faint but familiar, drifting through the winter night, through falling snow, touching her heart, a melody of loss and of faith that refused to die. By late afternoon, the headlines were everywhere. Matteo Romano steps down as CEO of Romano Foundation. Heir to the Romano Empire chooses love over power. Reporters speculated wildly. Was it a scandal? A woman? Or the influence of the old patriarch, Salvatore Romano? No one knew the truth. Only Matteo, sitting alone in a silent room, understood that he hadn't fallen. He had chosen. He had chosen his heart over power. When asked by the press, he gave a single calm answer. If I must choose between running an empire without a soul and building something that means something, I'll choose the latter. He left quietly. No press conferences, no applause, no farewell parade. He walked away from 58 floors of glass and steel, from hundreds of people who once waited for his orders, carrying with him only a rolled-up blueprint titled, Italy in the Heart of New York. 3 months later. Spring in New York was unusually bright. In Soho, where an old warehouse once stood forgotten, a new building rose, the Center for Contemporary Italian Art. Outside, the Italian flag waved beside the American one. Inside, sunlight spilled across curved white hallways, reflecting hues of olive green, terracotta, and honey gold. The three colors, Matteo said, carry the soul of Italy. Landscape paintings of Amalfi, Florence, and Venice hung beside black and white portraits of New York street life. And in the middle stood a living olive tree, brought all the way from Sicily, a symbol of reconciliation, of roots, and of peace. On the second floor was a special gallery, the Eleonora Room, named after his mother. The walls were covered in sheet music, old photographs of her with a violin, her eyes soft, carrying the warmth of a Mediterranean sunset. By the entrance, a small bronze plaque read, "For my mother, who taught me that art is not to be owned, but to be felt." Matteo stood there a long time. He hadn't cried in 20 years. But that afternoon, surrounded by music, he smiled, a fragile, genuine smile after a lifetime of restraint. Guests began to arrive. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered, Italian and American artists mingled and toasted. Everyone congratulated him on an inspiring new beginning. He merely nodded, glass of red wine in hand, his voice calm. I didn't build this center to be admired. I built it to remind myself that there are still things more beautiful than money. When an assistant asked quietly, "Aren't you afraid your father might retaliate?" He replied with a faint smile, "My father built an empire out of steel. I'm building a home out of memory. Time will decide which lasts longer." As the opening event wound down, the crowd began to thin. Matteo stayed behind. The soft amber light of dusk spilled through the tall windows, casting a golden glow on the floor. He walked the halls slowly, fingertips brushing the walls. Every frame, every detail carried his touch, and her memory. In the Venice corner of the gallery hung a photograph no one else understood, a cup of espresso beside a small notebook. The handwriting delicate and slanted. Every language can lie, but art never does. He smiled faintly. She might have left, but her presence lingered here, like the scent of coffee after a morning long gone. He turned toward the exit. Then a voice, soft and familiar, echoed behind him. "You forgot one thing. Italians never leave a party before finishing their last glass of wine." Matteo froze. For half a second, his heart stopped. He would know that voice anywhere. He turned. Isabella stood in the doorway, wrapped in a red dress the color of Chianti wine. The sunset embraced her like a living painting. Her chestnut hair fell gently over her shoulders. Her eyes shimmered with both courage and nervous laughter. In her hand, a thin folder, a contract. "I heard the new art center needs a communications manager," she said lightly. "I speak Italian," she shrugged, "and I happen to know a very stubborn Italian man." Matteo chuckled softly, his voice low. "Stubborn and arrogant, and a little romantic, though he hides it well." He stepped closer. Their eyes met. No more fear, no more doubt. Only understanding, the kind born from walking through fire and finding home again. "You really came back?" he asked. "No," she smiled. "I never left. You just needed time to find me. In this place." He was silent for a moment, then murmured, "I think my mother would have liked you." "I think she's smiling right now," Isabella whispered. Outside, the sun sank behind Manhattan's skyline. The final light touched the silver plaque at the entrance. Italy in the heart of New York. And in the quiet rhythm of his own heartbeat, Matteo knew. Italy had come home again, not just in art or color or song, but in light, in music. And in the woman who taught him that emotion, too, could be a language. The opening night of Italy in the heart of New York, the first exhibition of the new Italian Art Center, was one of the most anticipated events of the spring. Golden lights shimmered against the vaulted glass ceiling. Paintings of Italian landscapes glowed in the soft light of classical violin music. Everything felt both modern and nostalgic, just like the man who had created it, Matteo Romano. At the center of the grand hall hung a portrait of Eleonora Romano, the renowned violinist, and Matteo's mother. Beneath it, a silver plaque read, "For my mother who taught me that music is another language for love." Isabella stood silently before the portrait. The music shifted to Vivaldi's Winter. The piece Matteo once said was, "the sound of someone who doesn't know how to cry." She knew how much this night meant to him, not just as a tribute to Italian art, but as an attempt to heal the boy who had never been allowed to grieve for his mother. When Matteo stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell quiet. He wore a black tuxedo, tie loose, expression calm, but his eyes shone beneath the light. His voice carried, low, steady, real. "When I was a child, I thought Italy existed only in my mother's memories, in her music, and in mornings that smelled of bitter coffee. But tonight I realize Italy is still here, in music, in article, and in those who still believe in feeling." He paused, took a breath, then smiled faintly toward the crowd. "Someone once called me Testa di Ferro, an ironhead, arrogant, heartless, and maybe they were right. I spent half my life hiding my heart behind work, behind discipline, behind steel walls." Then his gaze found Isabella, standing at the front row, her red dress soft as breath. "Until someone broke those walls," with one tiny insult, in Sicilian. Laughter rippled through the hall. Isabella blushed, trying to glare at him, but her lips betrayed her with a smile. Matteo's voice trembled slightly but stayed warm. "I want to end this night by beginning something new. Not a project, not a journey, but a life." He set down the microphone, stepped off the stage, and walked straight toward her, through 100 flashing cameras and 1,000 heartbeats. And right there, beneath a ceiling of light that shimmered like falling stars, he knelt. The violin softened to a tender melody. He opened a small black velvet box, a diamond catching every reflection of gold in the room. His voice was hoarse, but every word was clear. A promise, not a performance. "You once called me an arrogant Testa di Ferro. You were right, but now, can you call me your arrogant husband instead?" The hall erupted with laughter and applause. Isabella's tears glistened, her voice shaking but playful. "Say it again, but this time, look at me." Matteo lifted his gaze. Their eyes met, deep, steady, unguarded. And in that instant, all the noise faded away. Only the two of them remained, surrounded by light, art, and the forgiveness of memory. "Marry me," he whispered. She smiled, bright as early summer sunlight. "All right, but I'm keeping the espresso machine." Laughter burst across the room. Applause rose. Fireworks shimmered softly beyond the glass dome. Matteo stood, slid the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling, his eyes unwavering, as if sealing not just a promise, but the final line of a story that had begun, with one cup of coffee and one Sicilian word. That morning, the sky over New York was impossibly clear. The fourth floor of the Italian Art Center bloomed with white and blush olive blossoms, symbols of reconciliation and new beginnings. Music drifted through the air. Conte Partiro played softly by a live string quartet, filling the space with sunlight and memory. Down the ivory-carpeted aisle, Isabella appeared. Her satin gown shimmered with each step. Open-backed, edged with lace as delicate as breath. Her hair was swept into a low chignon, adorned with a sprig of lavender. The scent, Matteo once said, smells like Italy in summer. She smiled, walking slowly, each step melting into the rhythm of the music. At the end of the aisle, Matteo waited. White suit, silver gray tie, and eyes brighter than any light in the room. When she drew near, he took a slow breath, unable to believe that the dream had finally become real. As the priest read the vows, Matteo took her hand, his deep voice trembling slightly. You once made an entire empire of my emotions collapse with one insult in Sicilian. Laughter rippled through the crowd. He smiled, softer now. But you also helped me rebuild everything. This time, with my heart. Isabella's eyes shimmered. And you made me believe there's no translation more beautiful than I belong to you. Applause, laughter, music. When they exchanged rings, light from the tall windows fell across their faces. Warm, honest, and golden, like a promise fulfilled. Later, when the guests drifted toward the reception, Matteo stepped out onto the terrace for some fresh air. There, at the far end, leaning on the balcony rail, stood a figure he knew instantly. Silver hair, proud posture, piercing eyes. Salvatore Romano. Matteo froze. For a moment, memories surged. The arguments, the threats, the heavy silences. But the wind this time was not cold. Salvatore turned. His gaze wasn't sharp anymore, only tired, but clear. I wasn't going to come, he said hoarsely. But your mother, she used to dream of this day. A day with music, with peace, and with you smiling again. Matteo couldn't speak. The words caught in his throat. Salvatore looked out over the city, golden light falling across his shoulders. I built the Roman Empire out of fear. You built this center out of faith. Maybe that's why she loved you more than me. He turned back, voice shaking, with age and something far harder for him to say. Thank you for doing what I never could, for bringing Italy back, here to the heart of New York. Matteo stepped forward. No speeches, no words. He simply placed a hand on his father's shoulder. A small gesture, but one that carried 2 decades of forgiveness. Evening descended. The wedding turned into a rooftop soiree under the soft glow of fairy lights. Italian red wine shimmered in crystal glasses. Violin music mingled with laughter. Isabella moved through the guests, part bride, part director of the Italian Art Center, now one of New York's most celebrated cultural spaces. Art magazines had begun calling her the Heart of Italy project, the soul behind its success. From across the room, Matteo watched her, pride and quiet awe in his gaze. She wasn't just the woman he loved. She was the heartbeat of everything he had rebuilt. A journalist approached him. Mr. Romano, is it true you're returning to the company? He smiled. Yes, but not to lead through fear as before. I'm rebuilding the Romano Foundation the way my mother would have wanted, as a bridge between people and feeling. And your new motto? He looked toward Isabella, radiant under the string lights, laughing with the Italian students. Lead with reason, live with heart. Night deepened. On the terrace, Isabella poured 2 cups of espresso, an old habit neither of them had ever broken. Matteo took one, gently clinking it against hers. Remember the first morning we met? You asked if I could make espresso, and you cursed me in Sicilian. A pretty traditional start for an Italian marriage, don't you think? They laughed. The night breeze carried the scents of lavender and coffee, the 2 fragrances that had accompanied them throughout their journey.